You're on a slightly altered podcast on which I rant. This podcast is going to be a little bit more dodgy than the normal ones because I'm unable to listen back to the audio. The audio ports on my computer seem to have miraculously failed. This has happened before. I don't know why this happens, but I'm not going to be able to listen back to any of this to properly edit it. So you're just going to have to deal with the tweaks around the edges that I'm able to make with the computer hardware that I currently have. The first rant is for Jay Ness, who wants me to rant about Healthy Gamer GG. Now, the first thing that I've noticed about this channel is just how high the production quality is. Like, for videos that are oftentimes an hour, over an hour, 2 hours, these videos are pretty well done. They're just sort of conversations between the host and a number of different mental health adjacent figures, or people who have done well in video games. Like there's an episode with Bobby Scar. He's the most electrifying man in Smash today. This guy. There's a number of people who show up on his channel, but basically the idea is to help people through video game addiction and how to deal with the transition into real life, how to set goals for yourself, how to do meditation. He talks about dharma and these other psychologically advancing things. Like they're meant to give you a sort of positive outlook on life and deal with the problems that you might face with video games head on. And I think that's great. I'm generally in favor of self-help if it works for you. I've read a lot of self-help books and watched a lot of videos on self-help, and they didn't really do very much for me, but I have gotten some advice that I will never forget from looking through those things. So I think people should check it out. He talks about like nutrition. He talks about having relationships and stuff. It comes from a much less biased perspective than people who don't play video games, because the host of the show is actually a gamer. There's a reason why he's talking about video games from a psychological perspective. It's because he cares about the medium and community around it. And one of the most interesting things about this channel, to me at least, are the early videos that he starts out with, where he's talking about dopamine and the different ways in which you psychologically interact with video games. And they're basically just speeches. They're speeches that he did that are cut up into little parts on the channel. And I actually like those videos more than the interviews that he did and the quick explaining videos talking about different psychological concepts. I like the videos of him just in front of a blackboard, just talking about learning circuitry and shit. I thought that was really cool. But I'm glad this channel was brought to my attention because I have not seen anything else like this online. A channel specifically meant for gamers dealing with gaming addiction and other gaming adjacent psychological problems. I haven't seen another channel completely dedicated to doing this, certainly not with the level of research or knowledge that this guy does it with. So I think that's great. I've never personally been addicted to games. I would say I have what is called like an anti-addictive personality. It's very hard for me to get addicted to anything, or if I do, I'm the type of guy who can just go cold turkey immediately and then be fine. I have a weird ability of just stopping with addictions. I just stop and then the addiction is over, because to me, like, logically that's what you're supposed to do. If you're doing something that's harming yourself in some way, you should stop doing it. Like that seems to me the logical answer to take. But with other people, they get caught up in it a bit too much, and so they need a bit more of a push. They need to work around their mind a bit more. And for people like that, this channel is a great fit. I can see it helping a lot of people. I mean, according to the comments, it has helped a lot of people. But gaming addiction can be a real thing. Psychologically, you can be addicted to anything. It's just a matter of if it releases pleasure for you or not. And so you can become psychologically addicted to all kinds of especially if you're predisposed to it. So, very helpful channel. Then I'm going to skip JNess's rant just to go to Fox with 2 X's, who told me to rant about my ex-boyfriend. Well, I've talked about this topic in a bit of detail in the past. Basically, I was with this guy who now appears to be a trans woman of some kind. I don't know what all of that's about. A bit of a surprise to me. But yeah, I was with this person. I'll just refer to them gender neutrally because I'm talking about them in the past context, but I don't really want to infringe upon the current identity that they reside with. But basically, they were basically like my best friend at the time, and they were the first friend who I had made who was like my own age. I never really had friends who were my own age before that point, especially not, people who were that similar to me, because like most of what we talk about when we first met was doing YouTube, just obsessively wanting to become YouTubers because there was nothing else we wanted to do in real life. And so we connected a lot. We had a lot of similarities in things that we connected over. And that was sort of how I had fell in love with them. And it was a long process. It took like a year and a half of me having feelings for them until I actually successfully popped the question. And it ended pretty badly. It didn't end so well because that was the first like really connective relationship that I had with someone that I had genuinely really loved. And that happens. I mean, there's not much you can do about it. Relationships end. People find new people. To be honest, I don't really like... Well, it's not that I don't like talking about it. It just feels like it's beating a dead horse. Yeah, that's that. Ex-boyfriend. Rant about... this one's from JNess here. A rant about the rise of anti-Chinese propaganda following the discovery of the coronavirus. This concerns me a lot because, obviously, as someone who's against racism, I don't think you should be against all Chinese people just because the coronavirus happened. Culturally, there are things that they do that probably led to the coronavirus, like eating animals that by most cultural standards, you should not be eating bats, you should not be eating lizards and these kind of things. But they do it over there. It's just a long-standing cultural practice that, has come around for thousands of years. So it's one of those things that, like, it's different. We find it gross, but we find it gross because we come from a different cultural standpoint. Now, I'm not one of these people who makes the argument that, every single aspect of someone's culture should be defended just because it's different or just because they're part of an oppressed nationality. But Chinese people have had a real history of racism against them, whether it's, dying building the railroads in the United States or currently being the target of distrust by the intelligence agencies. I remember seeing an NPR article last year talking about random Chinese students being investigated for going to these Beijing America cooperation type schools or whatever. It was like a poli-sci kind of thing, really prestigious, and like they'd get calls from the FBI just for going there. And so there's a certain fear. There's a certain fear surrounding Chinese people, especially in places like Australia, where, with Australia, they have to rely very heavily on exports or imports from other countries because they don't have a lot of arable land. And it's kind of just like it's a big desert in the middle of the ocean. And so a lot of Australian people really don't like the Chinese because they see them as, intervening in the Australian political system when really what they're doing is just trading. And obviously when you trade with a country a lot, you're going to make certain, what is the word, concessions for them because you want to be on the good side of the person who you're trading with. That's just sort of a natural thing that happens all over the world. But a lot of Australian people hate Chinese people because of that. And so it occurs all over the world, but a lot in the English-speaking sphere. I know South Korea is starting to have big anti-Chinese sentiment as well now. It's not due to the people. It's not due to the color of the skin of the people, or or necessarily the place that they come from. It's due to some people eating animals that they should not have been eating from a shady market. There's stupid people everywhere. I bet you there's people in the United States who would do that right now, especially in the South. Like, people from the South, they'll eat just about anything. I've seen people eat toads and stuff before. These people are everywhere. It's not specifically Chinese people. There is a bit of a cultural history of eating weird animals there, but it's not exclusive to China or even just Asia. There are people like that everywhere you go. And so to make the generalization that it's Chinese people who are the problem here is completely ludicrous. You can have as many problems with the government and society as you want, but the basic reality is that Chinese people did not do this to you. Viruses just happen sometimes. Sometimes new viruses come about in nature, and no one could have predicted it. I'm gonna switch to actually no, I'll leave C's question after this next JNS question, but so the next question JNS wrote was, who is the most relatable leftist to you? I'm generally someone who doesn't relate to a lot of people. I find it difficult to relate to people, so to say who's the most relatable is a bit difficult. I guess I'd say Zizek, just because I like a lot of Zizek's philosophy on life, and you know, the general like way that he frames things is something that I can get behind. But I wouldn't say that, you know, oh, Zizek is totally me or something. That would be silly. But I do relate to a lot of the stuff that he talks about. Especially like that video, the Big Think interview that he did, where he talks about the idea of being an interesting person instead of a happy person. You know, why be happy when you could be interesting? That's basically been my philosophy on life for a very, very long time. So he has these little anecdotes that he gives that I can heavily find myself within. So if I had to give an answer, I'd say Zizek, but in general, I don't tend to relate to a lot of leftists. Just because I don't relate to a lot of people. It's very, very difficult for me to relate to other people. So C wanted me to rant about the podcast that he did and sent to me. Now, I listened to all of the episodes of this podcast, the Caruze cast, which is basically just him and his best friend talking with one another, and sometimes there's like random other people who jump in as well. But it's very high school, you know, Bay Area, California energy, but with weebs. Like, this is the sense that I would get if I had like real friends, IRL, and had people around me who had the same interests as I do. I feel like it would be conversations like this. They're very of the time that they were made. Like, I listen to them, and it doesn't feel like I'm actually listening to a podcast. It feels like I'm just listening to a straight conversation. It's almost like a friend simulator, in the most literal sense, that, like, these are friends who are just going about their daily activities and happen to be recording it at the time. It doesn't even feel like there's a camera there, even when they acknowledge that there is one. Which is really special. It's a very special vibe. But I like the sort of dynamic that the people have with one another, the fact that they can talk for that long about seemingly random subjects. Like, the topics go all over the place. It may seem like they have a certain skeleton that they're going by, but they can, you know, go right past that in an instant and go on to some random anecdotal joke, and it's great. But this is basically just, if you distilled all of the elements of Bay Area high school anime fandom, but with people who are not cringe. Well, if they are cringe, they're cringe in a good way. And you took them all and you put them into one. That would be this podcast. And it's good. There will be a link in the description below for you to listen to it. I liked it. So the next rant is also for JNS, who, by the way, the reason I'm giving JNS so many rants is it was as an accommodation for not getting the $50 patron video that they told me to write done yet. So that's why JNS has so many rants here. I feel like I should have made that clear earlier, but regardless. Digi writing a part-time light novel. To be honest, I haven't listened to any of it. I don't watch very much Digibro content anymore. I did listen to the first part, the first chapter that he did. What was it called? Just so I could get a sense for this video. I need to find the name of the chapter. It's Road to Radcon that he was writing. Road to Radcon 4 is that basically these are just little silly stories that he's doing as Radcon goes on. They're just sort of fun little stories. Like, they're not amazingly written or anything like that. The point of them is just sort of to be fun. Like the first little bit there is 2 pages. That's the first chapter. So I think it's cool that he's writing a light novel. I think any kind of creative writing is fun. I like the fact that it's sort of this self-indulgent, anime-inspired, meme tier book. I like it. I like things to be silly. It's very silly. But it's not really something that I would have the energy to consume all of. Like, I really enjoyed his first light novel, the I wrote this in like a day, that one. And I liked the Scarlet City book that he did when he was like 19 years old with the lolicon and stuff in. But this new one, at least from the first chapter, I just wasn't able to connect with it. I skimmed a bit of the second chapter. I'm actually skimming it right now. And this isn't really something that I can resonate with very much. I don't know if it's the fact that I just find Digi less relatable now than I used to. But it's not really... I don't connect with it in the same way that I did the other one, because with the other one it felt like it was just pure insanity being rattled back at in like a day, that there was a certain time restraint to it. With this one, it feels like he's trying to put in a bit more effort, and that almost takes away what made, I think, his writing special up to this point. In the case of Scarlet City, the one that he had wrote when he was like 19, there was effort being put into that, but it was the sort of like naive, childlike effort. Childlike, I'm the same fucking age. But but it had this feeling that like this is like the best that a teenager could do. And so it felt special because of that, because the concepts surrounding it were very of the time. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's fine. I don't think I'll end up finishing it. Nintendo milking Pokemon for money. I've never been the biggest Pokemon fan. I like the first generation and the second generation. They're fine. I like the Mystery Dungeon games. But all of the Pokemon games are essentially the same. Like, there's little tweaks made around the edges, but I don't find them to be that significantly different from one another. It just feels like a lot of the stuff that we've already seen from Pokemon being rehashed every single time. And it's fine if you like that formula ad infinitum, but I don't. I thought it was fine the first couple times for nostalgia's sake. It's just sort of like baby's first JRPG. I'm not a Pokemon person, so it's, to me, when I look at all of these games that have been made, it's like, yeah, they've been milking it for ages. I wish they would introduce more new things to the series to try to spice things up and not just make same mechanics that they've always been doing without updating them. But it is ultimately a for-profit company, and as much as I love Nintendo for taking more risks and doing things that go against their profits, you know, they're gonna do what guarantees making them money a lot of the time, even if they are more experimental than other for-profit companies. Rant about the biggest improvement you've made in your writing. I would say the biggest improvement that I've made in my writing is just generally being more concise and putting in less details over time. Where, like, before I was very frantic with the way that I wrote in the beginning. I included a lot of unnecessary details that didn't really belong. I under-explained things that needed more explanations. Like, I'd have two sentences explaining one idea, and they didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of it, even though it was rather important. And then I'd have a bunch of random anecdotes about another thing that wasn't that important. So the biggest improvement I've made over time is to sort of differentiate which parts should be talked about and which parts shouldn't be talked about. Because obviously you have a point that you're trying to make with the video, and you have to keep that point in mind to be able to produce a video that accurately gets across that point. So density, or it's just becoming more dense over time, being able to convey the idea with more, what's it called? More efficiency. So becoming more efficient is the biggest improvement that I've made by far. My advice would be to consider what a sentence is functionally doing. If a sentence is not adding to the overall point of the video, or is not adding anything at all, just cut it out. Even with words, like identifying the individual words that aren't doing something, I think is very important. Now, you can add that detail back in for the sake of personality, where I have filler words in my scripts that are done strictly in order to convey a certain persona. But you have to be careful with that. You have to know how to do it. So yeah, I would say just becoming more dense has been by far the biggest improvement that I've made over time, and not focusing so much on the analysis, where the videos I've enjoyed making the most are more narrativistic, where their goal is to tell a story more than they are to necessarily analyze something. Now, that's often done through analysis, where I would say there's analysis in all of the written videos that I've done. The difference, or the caveat, being that some of them focus more on telling the story through the analysis than having the the analysis tell the story. So it's a difference of scales. Like the Why I Watch Anime video, for example, that video is written in a way that conveys a narrative. It's edited in a way that conveys a narrative. But it's not telling, it's not explicitly telling you a story. The story is about anime, sure, but it's more so analyzing that component of it, whereas something like These Four Walls, or to a greater extent Laundromats Are Cool, there's analysis in it, but it's telling a story. So the thing I've learned the most is to sort of focus on the parts that I'm good at, the things that I really like doing, which is telling the stories, and the way that I've learned to do that more effectively, density. Let's see. What kind of music makes you think about the happy and sad times in your life? That's an interesting question, because, even as I'm being asked, my dog is sad at this time. Come here, dog. Come here. He's upset. But, it's an interesting question, because I sort of categorize periods of time based on what music that I was listening to at that time. So, for example, in the fall, summer-ish of 2018, I was listening to a lot of like Japanese electronic and pop music, along with like trap rap. And I don't even like trap rap very much anymore, but that was most of what I was listening to at the time. And so when I look back, the way that I remember back to that time is going back to that music and then just reliving the memories that I had experienced then. If I want to go to like a month like August, for example, or July, August, I started listening to a lot more mindless self-indulgence, and so sometimes, a lot of it was listening to it in the park, like in, there was a part of Virginia I was living in where I'd go to the park at nighttime, and I would just blast mindless self-indulgence on the phone as I was walking through. And if I listen to some of those songs, I can still remember doing that. I'd be sitting on like the kids' swings and stuff, just being really depressed, trying to listen to the music to not think about it. And I remember, walking home at nighttime and seeing like people selling drugs to one another at the houses as I was walking home, and this kind of stuff. Like, I don't think I'd be able to have those memories as solidified as they are if not for the music that I was listening to at that time. And so I think there's a Vsauce video about this actually, about the feeling of nostalgia, why we feel nostalgia, where it talks about how music can like reinforce entire memories, because there's something psychologically that it does there. I don't remember exactly the point that he had made, but if you look up the video "Why We Feel Nostalgia," he talks a bit about that. So that's how I categorize things, is through music. I'm not always listening to the exact same music. I tend to switch it up depending on how much I was listening to one thing. And so the months in which I was listening to one specific thing, I can go back to that, and then the memories come flooding back of that time. So it isn't a kind of music that makes me think about those times. It's what music. Because I'm willing to listen to just about anything at any emotional state. You know, some songs are better for specific emotional states. Like if I wanted to listen to Johnny Cash, there are certain Johnny Cash songs that are just really sad, where, you know, they're obviously meant for you to listen to them in a more sad state. And the music can be improved by listening to them in that time because you're in the mindset with which they were written in. But I would also listen to those songs when I'm not sad, just because I appreciate the music itself. And so it isn't about a type of music, it's about which artists I was listening to. For example, and I mean, this has been like my favorite album since 2017, basically. But there are times when I was really sad, when I would listen to Johnny Hobo's Love Songs for the Apocalypse. But there were also times when I was really happy when I'd listen to the same album, because the album works for both contexts. Like, all of the lyrics and the way that they're performed are done so in a very like upbeat or loud, excitable kind of way. While at the same time, the content of the lyrics is very depressing. There's a lot of very like self-loathing, chaotic lyrics that describe a feeling of impending doom or just living like an asshole. And so the music, like the substance of the music, is sad. My dog is upset. This happens every time that there's noise outside. Come here, puppy. It's okay. But the substance of the lyrics is conveying, you know, one emotion, which is sadness, but the way in which they're performed is conveying happiness. And so you can sort of get both out of the songs. Or like, for example, one lyric off of that album from the song Church Hymn for the Condemned, is that Johnny says something like, and I'll take the beauty of my chaos over any ugly perfection. I've woken up on the wrong side of the bed since 1987. And so on the one hand, you're getting this very like, you know, upbeat kind of lyric, you know, I'll take my chaos over anyone's ugly perfection. You know, it's the idea of like radical self-acceptance, you know, even though there are aspects of this that are chaotic and crazy, and a bit messy sometimes. I'd rather have that than being perfect like other people, because I like this, you know? And so there's a bit of self-acceptance there. But at the same time, you could equally interpret sadness in those lyrics by saying, oh yeah, he has woken up on the wrong side of the bed every day since 1987. So it works for both mental states, where that song, it'll make me more upbeat when I'm sad, but I'm still dealing with the sadness that's in the song, and the sadness that I also, by proxy, relate to. So it's complicated. Like with everything, it's complicated. Hopefully that answers your question. And then the other question was what it's like being able to analyze things through dialectical materialism. I would say that it makes a lot of things easier. Come here, Doe. I'm gonna have to analyze my dog being upset through dialectical materialism. In a moment. He's not having. I think I'm gonna have to actually take him, because he doesn't appear to be doing too well. Come on. There's only a few more questions, boy. It's okay. It's okay. Being able to analyze things through dialectical materialism is very nifty, because essentially what dialectics is the I should explain what dialectics is first before going on to materialism, because ultimately it's a combination of the two. So dialectics as an idea, very basically speaking, is the belief that when two ideas exist, one provides an antithesis, whereas the other provides a thesis. And as the ideas clash with one another, they begin to form a synthesis out of those two. And so these two things cannot exist with one another. They clash, they conflict, and when they conflict with one another, they form a synthesis which provides a more coherent and cohesive argument than the two on their own. Is that there's always holes in each idea, and so there's those holes lead to questions that are being dealt with through dialectics. They're contradictions, basically. That's the idea, is that things in the world, in the realm of ideas, contradict one another, and so those contradictions act to form a synthesis that breaks through those contradictions, but can also lead to more being arose that, need to be hammered out as well. So that's the idea behind dialectics, whereas dialectical materialism takes this idea and applies it to the material world. It believes that societies progress in a similar way to the way that ideas progress that Hegel had presented with his concept of dialectics, and that specifically all things are rooted in class struggle. That the rise of capitalism, the end of feudalism. And the way that the world progresses as a whole is it's always changing. History is always in motion. You never step into the same river twice, blah, blah, blah. But that this motor is specifically driven by class antagonisms. That class as it exists is in contradiction, or that working class is in contradiction with capitalist class. And so that as history progresses, that class conflict is always there. And the various results that we've received throughout history have been rooted in such. And so being able to analyze things through dialectical materialism gives you a lot of context for how the world works, and it also allows you to get rid of a lot of the ideas that you have, which may have been bunk and not rooted in anything, Let's see here. I think I may have to go give my dog a walk, so this recording will have to conclude in a moment. Okay, now that my dog has been walked, the next rant, again, is for JNS, who wants me to rant about the first episode of Hands Off Izioken. My Japanese pronunciation continues to get worse every day. I need to practice. Basically, what this show is about a girl, Asukusa Midori, who basically wants to be an animator. She dreams of making her own animation. That's what she's really obsessed with. There are these cute little moments in the show that are done all through like sketch art. I guess that's how I would describe them. And then they begin to contrast with the more realistic animation that's present throughout the series. There's really nice contrast on colors in some of these scenes. It looks really nice. Like, the show looks really good. Some of the background characters I wish had a little bit more detail, but I mean, I don't tend to pay that much attention to that stuff anyway. But it looks really good. Like, they did a great job on the way that the series looks. I like all of the characters' heads. The heads look different than heads in anime. But yeah, it's just a cute series about this girl who really wants to make anime. She finds some friends at an anime club who she can hang out with and make anime with. And I'm assuming that's going to be the progression of the story. The first episode almost feels like it's promoting anime creation. Like, it's Shirobako had more of the sense that, these characters were all struggling, but they were just doing their passions anyway, even though it was hard. This show feels like a promotion of anime. It feels like this girl's really passionate, and she just wants to do it, and she's gonna get it done. I like it. It has vigor to it. It's got excitability. Like I said, the aesthetic is very much my thing. I'm looking forward to watching a rest of the series. The next rant that JNS wanted me to do is about what makes a socialist country revisionist, because there seem to be arguments about whether China is revisionist or not. Revisionism as a concept, I would just completely throw out. You don't need to worry about it, because where it essentially comes from is this belief that Marxism can be done one way. Whereas if we know about dialectical materialism, it's the belief that the world is always changing, that you have to adapt you have to adapt to the circumstances that you're in order to creatively apply Marxism. Like, Marxism's not a dogma. Marx did not leave behind a coherent plan of action that every single country must take. What he did say, however, was that you have to adapt based on the conditions that you're in. And that's part of materialism, is being able to make material adaptations in order to progress society as a whole. That the circumstances that exist in China are definitely not the circumstances that exist in Cuba, North Korea, and other historically socialist countries. And so what they're grappling with is going to inevitably be different. What a socialist country is, what ultimately defines socialism, in my view, is to orient the economy around an agenda that works for the needs of all people. To have, the banks, factories, major industries, centers of economic power in the country be subordinate to an economic plan that aligns itself with growing the economy to benefit the people more. To provide more housing, more food, more jobs, and update the quality of life, give people better living standards as a whole. In the USSR, this meant giving everyone universal housing. This meant making it to where, the illiteracy was eliminated. This meant giving every single person a well-paying job with union rights and a number of other things. Whereas, now in China, the goal of their country is to sort of break out of the Western-dominated system, because they look at the Soviet Union and they think, if this country, just had a bigger economy, if they were the number one economy in the world, if they had the most military strength, if their socialist system made everyone so wealthy and so prosperous, they wouldn't be able to be taken down by the international financial system, because at that point they would be the international financial system. And that's the Chinese mindset, is that with socialism with Chinese characteristics, what it essentially recognizes is that because the West dominates so many spheres of the globe and has so much power due to imperializing all of these other countries, which historically socialist countries were not able to do, what the idea is that, okay, we're not going to give up planning out the economy, we're not going to give up, the majority of the industries being under state planning, but what we are going to do is have these special economic zones which focus on benefiting corporations in the West, or being able to cooperate with them on win-win cooperation, being able to manufacture things for other countries around the world, to integrate into the international financial system while retaining the ideals of a socialist society, is basically what the Chinese government seeks to do. And they've been able to lift tremendous amounts of people out of poverty through doing that. Through orienting the economy in a rationally planned way. That's how they've curbed so many economic crises, etc. And so what makes a socialist country revisionist is a question that I'm not even concerned with, because Marxism is always going to adapt in different ways. It's going to exist in different ways depending on the conditions of each country. In China's case, the reason why they have more of a private element of their economy, or a private sector, that was the word I was looking for, is purely for pragmatic reasons. It's because they're trying to beat the West at the West's own game while being able to use the elements of their economy which are socialistic to their advantage. There are aspects that they've beat the West in that the West just literally can't do because they don't have central planning and they don't have state-run banking, and these other things. They don't have state-run mineral extraction, etc. So I wouldn't say that China is necessarily revisionist. At the end of the day, they have a communist party which is run by and large working class people, people who are not millionaires, people who come from a pretty working class background. The constituency of each place that votes on the party tends to be working class people. Which isn't to say there aren't more right-wing factions in the CPC, but the general idea is that the government controls the private sector. It's the goal of the government, to command the private sector to act according to a rational plan that the economy is set for. That's the main difference, is that in socialism, the state controls the private sector for the good of the public. Whereas in capitalism, the private sector controls the government for greed and wants of corporations. Corporations don't control the government in China. And while other socialist countries have been more radical, or socialist countries in the world today are more radical in that they provide certain things that China does not, it's undeniable to say that, at the very least, the way in which China's economy orients itself is fundamentally different than any other country around the world, except for ones that do identify with socialism, which people who make the revisionist argument against China would admit that those countries are socialist, like Cuba, DPRK, etc. One last rant. I give you permission to talk about my gender dysphoria because I feel like it's an interesting topic and it wouldn't hurt to receive some affirmation. I think you are definitely trans. The way that you've described feeling gender euphoria or gender affirmation when people call you feminine or just call you by the right pronouns, etc., which that's true. You are definitely very feminine. That's a form of gender euphoria, which is a bigger sign of being trans than like gender dysphoria, because some people have experienced dysphoria throughout their lives and then it's just gone away. Like it just went away. It was a fleeting thought. But for as often as you've described wanting to be feminine or girl-like, and for as happy as the concept has made you, I think that goes a degree above where normal people are at. Like, most people do not want to be girls. That's just not how that works. But it's an interesting phenomenon because there are people who claim that, if you want to keep your dick, if you're fine with having a dick and you don't want to change to female genitalia, then you're just not trans. When what being trans is more about is about the social connotations that exist around your gender, the way that you present yourself and the way that that's reacted to by other people. Like the sort of genitalia that you have, that most people aren't going to see that. It doesn't have nearly as much to do with how you present yourself as some people would like to present it. Is that you can experience dysphoria and want to be a girl while still feeling that way. It's just that other people experience dysphoria to a more severe degree. But yeah, I think you're definitely trans. There's no two ways about it. The story that you've told me about your trans experience is very similar to a lot of trans people who I've talked to, and I think you'd probably be a lot happier if you had HRT and could be affirmed by the way that you feel inside, which is wanting to be feminine. Gender's weird. People need to calm down out there on the streets. If you feel that you're a girl on the inside, then you are one. That's just how it goes. That was the Rant podcast for February.